Here we go. Do you have to consent again?
No, not usually.
Welcome everyone to this J. Reuben Clark Law Society presentation, which is the second presentation in a series of presentations on the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which is abbreviated NCOSE, or we'll be referring to it as NCOSE throughout this presentation. And we will be talking about how members of the J. Reuben Clark Law Society can support NCOSE in combating sexual exploitation and human trafficking. Their good work they do there. My name is Steve Davis, and I'm a member of the Law Society's Education Committee, which is sponsoring these presentations. And I'm joined today by two staff members of NCOSE, Eleanor Gaetan and Christen Price. As I mentioned, this is the second presentation in the important work that NCOSE does. The first presentation addressed and explained the problem of sexual exploitation. And this presentation we'll be talking with Eleanor and Christen and addressing how NCOSE works and how NCOSE goes about working to solve the problem of sexual exploitation. I encourage you as members of the Law Society to, after you view this presentation, to go forward and view our subsequent presentations and learn how you can get involved in this important work. Let me introduce our guests today. The first is Dr. Eleanor Gaetan, who is the Director of Public Policy at NCOSE and works closely with the NCOSE Law Center, where she leads strategic efforts at the federal, state, and local government levels, encouraging governments to develop policies for a world free from sexual exploitation. For the 10 years prior to joining NCOSE, Eleanor served as a senior litigative advisor for the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women International. From 2003 to 2009, as a White House appointee, Eleanor served as the senior coordinator for public outreach at the State Department's office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. She earned her PhD from the University of Maryland and also attended Yale University. But more importantly, she and her husband, Victor, have 5 children. So welcome to Eleanor, Dr. Gaetan.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet. Glad to have you. Christen Price serves as legal counsel for the NCOSE Law Center. Christen has been passionate about using the law to stop violence since she first encountered the issue of trafficking in person in college, and she now engages in legal advocacy to end impunity for all forms of sexual exploitation. In her role at NCOSE, Christen works to influence courts and legislatures toward protecting human dignity and equality on behalf of sexual exploitation survivors through legislative advocacy, litigation, and providing support to other attorneys, particularly with respect to sex trafficking, prostitution, child sex abuse, and pornography. And prior to joining NCOSE last year, Christen served as legal counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, and she was also an associate at the law firm of Wiley Ryan. Christen attended Georgetown University Law Center, where she worked for the Department of Justice's Child Exploitation and Obscenity section, and was a law fellow with Shared Hope International, where she analyzed state law protections across the United States for victims of sex trafficking. So we want to welcome Christen and Eleanor as our guests today, and thank you so much for your expertise and your work in this area at NCOSE.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. So again, the topic of our presentation today is how NCOSE works. So we just want to explain this as clearly and succinctly as possible to help our members know that NCOSE is a great organization that does great work, and we want to get involved in and support you. So I'll ask my first question to Dr. Gaetan, if I could. If you could answer just the basic question of who is the National Center on Sexual Exploitation?
So thanks, Steve. We were founded in the early 60s in New York City by a Catholic priest, an Orthodox minister, and a rabbi, I believe. It was very much a faith circle that came together in New York, originally around pornography. What's extraordinary is how forward thinking, how much this group of faith leaders anticipated the extraordinary problems that would come to our society when especially pornography and the sex trade, the sexual oriented businesses really exploded and became normalized in our society. So what NCOSE does with this long track record of having been before the internet involved in these issues and after the internet is to look at the intersection between prostitution, pornography, sex trafficking, childhood sexual assault, and the ways that these reinforce and connect with each other. Because day to day, you imagine that there are certain things that are, maybe unattractive and you don't want to go and you don't want your friends to go, like strip clubs, and then something that's really evil, like sex trafficking. And yet these are related. Unfortunately, strip clubs prove to be gateways into the criminal enterprise that is behind supporting sex trafficking across our nation and really worldwide. So NCOSE has this sort of very long perspective on how our postmodern society has gotten to where we are, which is many people are plagued, many people are victimized by quite a ubiquitous saturation of sexual imagery and then related pathologies, which are harming our society. You could say, sometimes we use the analogy of cigarette smoking. There's something that people did, but then as more and more empirical evidence was compiled to show how terrible smoking was, then society took action. Laws were changed, often as a function of legal activism. So what NCOSE is trying to replicate is some of that cultural change that happens when you identify a problem, you document a problem, you bring law cases on that problem, and you change laws on that problem. We have a research center, we have a law center, we have a public policy team, we have a corporate activism sector, because the corporate money making going on behind the scenes is fiercely driving a lot of both criminal activity, unfortunately, but also victimization. But we very much work hand in hand. The public policy team and the law center work very hand in hand. I'm here with my phenomenal colleague, Christen Price. And that's because we have to do things collaboratively in order to inspire the cultural change that we need. I will only add one thing, which is that we're nonpartisan and we are not a faith-based organization. However, you will find many faithful people who feel called to this issue active on our team, because I think for two reasons. Both, it's been individual champions who have created the most change around human trafficking and related issues. And also because if you have a critique of evil, then you can come to terms with some of these problems in a way that is much more instructive, and I think a deeper comprehension of what is at work today in our society.
Thank you so much for that background and this perspective that NCOSE has in this area. There are a lot. It's interesting that you say that it was originally founded by faith leaders. Such is true with the J. Reuben Clark Law Society. We have much in common, and we are a group made up of believers who think that this is a real problem. And grateful for your work in identifying the problem, as you mentioned, and taking that leadership role in combating it. Can you distill for us what exactly NCOSE's mission is, and what kinds of goals that NCOSE has?
The mission is to create a society free from sexual exploitation. And we believe that is achievable, especially by highlighting the harms that are documented empirically. So we have a very strong research center. And then creating more cultural understanding, especially through elites and through court cases that I hope Christen will talk about.
Yeah, why don't we turn it over to Christen for a moment to talk about ways in which NCOSE achieves its goals.
Thank you, Steve. NCOSE's approach, as Eleanor noted, is fundamentally very holistic. We try to address all forms of abuse and exploitation because we believe these things are interconnected and they reinforce each other. But we also want to make sure that we're addressing not just symptoms or kind of surface level problems, but that we're getting at the roots of things, as well as just avoiding the disciplinary silos that can sometimes happen when you focus on only one area. So that's why we do the litigation, we do the public education, we do the corporate advocacy. And this work is really informed by a couple of key values and principles as well. First of all, being survivor-centered and trauma-informed. We believe every person has the right to thrive. And we're very committed to doing whatever it takes to support survivors as they seek justice for themselves, as they seek recovery. Second, we're really committed to building a diverse movement to end sexual exploitation. We engage in a lot of coalition building. And we believe that the fight to oppose these human rights abuses should be broad. There shouldn't be any kind of political test or religious test. And because so much of the sex trade, so much of the industry, the exploitation is very fueled by racism and by misogyny and taking advantage of other marginalized groups, including the LGBTQ community, people who are impoverished, young people, we think it's very important for all of those voices to be part of the opposition to the violence. And then relatedly, a big principle for us is abolitionism. We believe that if you take human dignity seriously, if you take equality seriously, especially women's equality, there is no making peace with the sex trade. The violence, the harm, the abuse in the industry are not bugs, they're features. And this means we oppose all attempts to give any kind of legal cover to any of this, whether it's prostitution, pornography, and on a related note, really want to emphasize ending male demand, addressing male demand as a way of ending all of this. Too often in the status quo, we see people who are being exploited, who are being victimized. They're the ones who are criminalized. They're treated like the public nuisance. And meanwhile, the people that are engaging in this, directly perpetrating, enabling it or profiting from it in some way, get to remain respectable members of society. So that's something we really are quite passionate about reversing.
Right. And what can you tell us about the means of litigation you use to stop allowing these organizations to have legal cover?
So I think our theory of change is pretty straightforward. Right now in the status quo, sexual exploitation is profitable for the perpetrators and the enablers. And so our goal as litigators is to make it costly for them, costly enough that they have to stop doing it. And one of the ways that we do that is by bringing civil lawsuits featuring sex trafficking claims against people that are profiting from the sex trade, especially corporate mainstream entities, including big tech, including pornographers, online platforms, and so on.
Yeah, and I look forward to in a subsequent presentation going into that in more detail and the successes you've had. NCOSE has really gone after some big players in big tech and has some very ambitious lawsuits and achievements, and but I want to emphasize for our members that supporting NCOSE doesn't mean you necessarily have to get involved personally in one of these lawsuits. There are many other things we can do as members of the Law Society to support these efforts. There are lawsuits that you mentioned, but you also NCOSE is also involved in legislation, isn't it? And trying to change legislation for the better.
Yes, it's extremely important. And let me take an example. There's a bill called the Earn It Act, which was introduced last Congress. As most people know, Congress has a 2-year session. A bill, if it isn't passed, it can be reintroduced. So this bill has not been yet reintroduced. We expect it to be. But the Senate Judiciary Committee, which includes, I think, absolutely everyone on the Senate Judiciary is a lawyer, and including Utah's Senator Mike Lee is on that committee. And across the board, they're very well informed about human trafficking and sexual exploitation. They were looking at a bill that would remove immunity from digital platforms for child sexual abuse material. We used to call it child pornography. Now we emphasize that these are crime scene photographs, so we call it child sexual abuse material. This material is rampant on the internet. The National Center on Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, which has the federal task of collecting images and alerting law enforcement around the country so that we can capture some of these predators, they're coping with millions of images, an astronomical increase over the last even year to year. The increase has been astronomical. Why? We have a few theories, and Christen can tell me if these are legal theories or just theories. For example, obscenity isn't being prosecuted. It is not lawful to have or to possess material that violates community standards, that has no artistic value, that is of prurient interest. Supreme Court has weighed in on obscenity. There's no legal First Amendment right to obscenity. And yet a case hasn't been taken under the last 3 administrations against obscenity. What happens neurologically with pornography is that you get hooked like a drug. It functions in your brain like a drug, and you seek more and more highs or different highs. And in pornography, that means more novel, more kinky, more unacceptable, more degrading material. And so people have moved into viewing child pornography who are not necessarily pedophiles, but they've moved there because they've become addicted to pornography. And there's brain science to back this up. So this bill just says, digital platforms, you billionaires, scour your platforms for this material, delete it before it's circulated. It's a very commonsensical approach. 22-0, ranging from Vice President Kamala Harris was on the committee then, to Senator Graham. Lindsey Graham was the chairman of the committee. Everybody voted for it, 22-0. They all know how bad the situation is. And they said, let's stop it. No more immunity for platforms that allow this stuff to ride the internet.
That's excellent.
It's an excellent bill, and we think we'll win it eventually. Unfortunately, just Google search Earn It Act, and you will find page after page after page of the sky is falling, the internet will break, this will ruin privacy, this will undermine encryption. Absolute misinformation being circulated by FANG, which is like Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. The big giants are misinforming the public because their Magna Carta is the Communications Decency Act of 1996. CDA has a section 230 that says pretty much blanket immunity for digital platforms, for anything that's online. And they have taken that to the bank and run. So they don't have the liability conscientiousness that every other entity in the United States has, which is, liability is bedrock American judicial principle. Right. And they get a giant get out of jail free card, and they truly are using it. They are not policing the site. Turn it over to Christen to mention a lawsuit. NCOSE is suing Twitter because they are allowing CSAM, also known as child pornography, to be rampant on an open platform that kids can just get on, and no filter will stop a kid from getting on Twitter. And you will see some absolutely not only disgracious stuff, but criminal material is on Twitter. Am I right, Christen?
Completely right. I mean, not only did the companies avoid liability for the most part, there is one exception to that immunity, which is for sex trafficking civil lawsuits. But not only do, as a general matter, these companies escape liability, but the financial incentives are quite perverse. These are sites that profit by the traffic driven to the site. So the more people that are viewing, the more people clicking on ads and so on, the more money the company makes. And so they have very little incentive to remove criminal material that they're not going to be held accountable for, because pornography drives traffic, and the more extreme it is, the more it drives people to the site. And so we are suing Twitter under that sex trafficking exception on behalf of 2 minors who had CSAM of themselves posted to the site. And one of the minors contacted Twitter after he found out about it and said, that's me, I'm a minor, please take it down. And Twitter wouldn't do it. They told him, we don't think this violates our policy, even after he showed government ID showing his age, even after his mother contacted them. They didn't take it down until like a family connection to law enforcement resulted in them getting contact from Homeland Security. Then they took it down, but at that point, it had already garnered 167,000 views. So that's the level of impunity these companies are operating with, and that's why they're fighting the Earn It bill so hard.
Right, that is absolutely astounding, and to me, and it's also astounding what Eleanor mentioned, that in the past 3 administrations, no prosecution has been initiated. I did not know that, and it's just so surprising that these companies even know that they have criminal content on criminally prohibited content on their websites, but refuse to take it down until pressed and absolutely forced to do so. So we thank you, Christen and Eleanor, and everyone at NCOSE for the work you're doing. It is such important work. We're so grateful that you are taking the lead in making this happen to rid the world of sexual exploitation a little bit at a time, and a big chunk at a time. Suing Twitter, I'm sure, is no small task. So we commend you for that. We thank you for joining us today, and we implore our Law Society members to find out more about the good work NCOSE is doing by viewing the other presentations which go into this in more detail. So again, thank you, Dr. Gaetan and Ms. Price, for joining us and telling us more about NCOSE and what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Look, my daughter gave me a rose while I was on, and I was like telling her, stop